He is an awarded scholar and teacher. He is an author with several research articles, book chapters, national academic presentation, and policy reports to his credit. David's married, has 2 beautiful daughters who attend public schools. I want you to all help me welcome David Garcia.
Listen, thank you very much. Okay, beyond all of that, do you know what I am? I'm a guy that's really excited for the school year to start. Truly, you think I'm kidding? Now, when you walked in, I assume you all clapped and cheered because you haven't seen each other for a while and got all excited. Did that happen when I was gone? No? Well, can you do it once for me, please? Because I am very excited. And I'm not just doing that so you can clap for me, by the way. I'm doing it because I really do get excited for school every year. I'm a professor. And so as a professor, you choose in your life to spend your entire life getting ready for school, just like many of you teachers do. And growing up, I was very excited for school. It meant we got a new pair of shoes around the house, and it meant that I could go and get school supplies this is when you know you're going to be a professor or a teacher when you get older, and get them all organized and ready for school. And it's exactly what my daughters and I just did. All of their stuff is organized and ready for school, so I'm genuinely excited and ready to go. So thank you, Christy, for the opportunity to be part of this today. So, what are we going to talk about? What are we here for? Look, I know that going forward, after you leave today, you're going to get into the nuts and bolts of finishing a school year. And I know you're going to get into the nuts and bolts of, if you're a bus driver, bus route miles, and if you're an administrative assistant, making sure that things get filled out correctly, benchmark assessments, and all of that stuff that's very, very important. But the reason I get excited, and the reason I think it's getting ready for school is so exciting, because I always take the time to sort of remember what it is I'm doing and what it's for. What it's for. And so with that, I'm going to just invite you to take a second and do a little of what I do to get ready, and let's stop and let's remember what it is that we're all here to do. And if I can get this thing to click. There you go. Went too far. So let's start with the context, folks. Let's start with the context. Schools have always been the leader of social change. Just know that going in. Know that going in that is what we do. And the reason that I think that is so powerful to me is because I remember when I was young, informative, and reading all kinds of things, I read a book called The Road Less Traveled. I remember that book a long time ago. And if you read the first 2 sentences, in my opinion, you can put the rest of the book down. Because the first 2 sentences read, life is hard, and as soon as you recognize that, you transcend it. And it was that straightforward for me. This is going to be hard work. And it's because I know it's hard work that I get a little angry at people who don't look at it and give it the kind of respect that it deserves. I know that you all face pressures. I know that for everything going on around schools, we look at what happens in schools and we say, why can't you fix those things? Right? I know that we look around at society and think, why can't schools go out and fix those things? I know that you feel embattled a lot. That not a lot of people say thank you, and as much as you like student artwork, and we all do, it'd be nice to get a sincere thank you that says, look, we appreciate what you do. And in the end, I know a lot of times, a lot of educators feel disrespected. And that aspect is what fires me up the most, because what you do, what we do, what you're about, in my opinion, is the most important endeavor we have in society. So think about this for a second. Every single new economy that this country has ever faced and adapted to, every single one, whether we went from farming communities to like industrial revolutions and now a technology-driven economy, every single one of those economies was started in classrooms and in schools. That's where it started. It didn't start out there in the business world. Yes, it manifested itself out there, but it started in your classrooms. Think about this one. Years ago, we're still fighting racial prejudice and we're still fighting issues with segregation today. But years ago, in '54, when the United States could not desegregate well, who did we turn to? We turned to schools. We turned to teachers. And we said, look, we know that everywhere else outside society, we can't get black and white folks to sit and work and be together, but we need you to make this happen. That's extraordinary, and that's hard. And I know that we face social changes, and you're the first one to face this, right? You're the first one to face the impact of technology, or social structures, or family structures changing. You need to get all of that together, and then sit down and get a young person to worry about things like prepositions. And that is what we do. So I'm going to just start out a little like that book and tell you this is tough work. There's no question about it. But this is also our work. And to me, this is what I get excited for. This is what I get excited for my daughters to be part of every single year. And so if we haven't stopped to think about it, let's take a second and let me have you think through exactly what I think schools do that's so amazing and remarkable. Listen to this for a second. What we do, what you do, is in schools, one generation educates another generation for a future that neither of them know. Think about that for a second. Okay. I had a buddy of mine just this morning tell me that he had an intern at work. They had to go clean out a bunch of software. And this young intern, college-level intern, found a floppy disk. How many of you remember a floppy disk? Remember that floppy disk? And this high school, this college student, pardon me, had no idea what the heck it was. And he had to explain what a floppy disk is. You are folks who are separated by a lifetime from the students who walk in your door. You grew up at a different time. Your idea of what relationships are, how technology fits, what books are, all of that is very different than students that walk in the door. Now, you have to take your reality, your experience, what you know, and shape it to teach somebody else who doesn't have that experience at all. That's rather remarkable. And the amazing part of that is you both are getting ready for a tomorrow that neither of you has any idea what it's like. You don't know what it is, I don't know what it is, and they don't know what it is. And yet, over and over and over again, in classrooms all over the country, public schools turn out students who are ready for that world and shape that world. And that is remarkable. Right? That's a remarkable thing to do. But in order to do it, you've got to recognize that you're not dealing with somebody who's your peer. You're dealing with someone who's basically far removed from your life experience. And how do you communicate? I can't think of any other profession, any other place that does this on a routine basis. And I can't think of any other place that does it as well as public education does. So that's what we're doing here. That's what I'm doing here. And that's what's ultimately most amazing to me. And I know that if I go too far again. Okay, and I know that it's amazing. So what is today's issue? What is the thing that we are working on, that you're working on, that is going to become tomorrow's issue for students going forward? And in my opinion, that issue is equity. And in a lot of times, in a lot of places that I get a chance to visit, equity is a really bad word. And it's a bad word because it's associated with race. It's associated with the haves and the have-nots. It's associated with what I'm getting, and I'm on the wrong slide again. Hang on. There we go. What I'm not getting, or you're getting, and nobody else is. And so, to me, the challenge really is, what you're getting students ready for is this idea of preparing for an equitable world. And so, how many of you have seen something like this? Right, you seen this before? Good. I chose this one for a reason. So I went and I looked up this to find this graphic. And there's a ton of them out there. And there's a ton of them out there on different assumptions. Right? You may have seen the one that had different sized people. Remember that? Have you seen that one? And they need different sized crates. I read this thing that said, well, look, that's not the way it is, because what we're saying is that people are different, right? That in other words, if you're shorter, if you have less capability, then you need more. That's kind of interesting and maybe one that we don't agree with, but what about a circumstance where everybody is the same size? Right? That there's inherent ability, or that it's just the same size. What you may not know about me personally is I'm literally from the other side of the valley. Like, just keep going, Gilbert, Mesa area, that's where I'm from. And growing up, I'm not any smarter than the kid next to me. Right? We're all basically the same size. We just started off at different places, and that's what this one communicates. That yes, they're all the same size, but they're starting off at different places. They're coming into the world in ways that are very different than their own. I think about this all the time because I'm a first-generation college student. My dad was a commercial painter, and I got the chance to get an education. And now I look at what is available to my daughters, and they're not on the far right of this anymore. They're starting off at a different place, fortunately for them. Right? But I do believe that they have the same capabilities as the student next to them. They're just starting off at a higher place. Good for them. Right? That's when this gets controversial. It gets controversial because folks look at this and go, all right, well, those people look pretty capable to me. They look like they can make it. Why are we giving them a hand? And there's where we get into social justice issues. There's where we get into issues of helping people out who may, again, otherwise not overtly have a disadvantage. And so why is it so important? Why do I talk about this a lot? Why do I think that it's amazing that your district, and by the way, one of the main reasons I'm here, and I should tell you, is because I was in a meeting, and Dr. Sandvik was in this meeting. And I've been in a lot of these kinds of meetings where people sit across from each other and they're very, very polite, nobody says anything, and we all walk out thinking we've solved the problem, that we're not sure what it is. And Dr. Sandvik stood up and said something that I have not heard this bravely in a very long time. She stood up and talked about the role of race in education, absolutely up front in a way that I'd never heard before. And it caught people off guard. It caught me a little bit off guard. And it was then that I said, I'm going to figure out what's going on with their bucket. Because that was a very brave statement to say in a meeting, again, where people are generally perfectly pleasant, right? And so why is this so important? Well, one, it's becoming more and more an indication that we're living in an inequitable world. And not only that, folks, our public policies actually encourage inequities. We know, it's pretty straightforward, some schools get more tax credits than others, correct? And we know what those schools look like, correct? And we live with that inequity. Our policymakers turn the other way and say, if they wanted more money, they would go out and get more money for their schools. Knowing darn well that, not knowing darn well, maybe not, that most of the students in many of our schools, their parents live in free and reduced lunch. They live in homes with free and reduced lunch. They don't have the money to give $400 and float the state, right? And we're not doing enough to say, you know what? Those students still deserve some kind of opportunity for extracurricular activities and to do the kinds of things that I thought were part of school when I grew up. And yet we're turning the other cheek. Second, we're spending a lot more time with people like ourselves. It's always been an issue, but we're seeing that more and more. Go to school like people like ourselves, wear the same clothes, go to the same coffee shop. And so how can we have a sense of empathy? How can we turn and say, I want to understand your view of the world if we spend our time, most of our time, and we're all guilty of this, me too, with a lot of people like ourselves. And what happens is we end up reinforcing what we think we already know. Right? You've got to battle against that. You've got to require a circumstance to get into allowing your students to see a world out there that they may not go home and know every day, but to recognize that there are people with a different experience in the United States, in Arizona, even in our own neighborhoods. This is also a challenge because it goes against this individualistic worldview. This idea that all we got to do is pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, right? Like I literally pulled myself up by my bootstraps, as you heard. Joined the military. That was my way out. And I was a nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare specialist too, by the way. That's gotten me a lot of job interviews, I should tell you. But the exciting thing about that I don't, but people don't recognize, if you've never been in the military, those of you who have, the military is actually a very supportive organization. The military helps you succeed. Right? And what they did that I'll always remember is for $100 a month, they gave me enough money to go through college. Right? I gave them $100 a month to call the GI Bill for a year. I got a lot more of that back. That was not equal. It was inequitable. But it made a huge difference for me, and I always remember that. And so, the idea here is when we say, we got people who will look at the world individualistically. And so, how do we work past that? This is not easy for a number of issues. Number one, we think about equity as the right thing to do. We talk about things that are very difficult, like social justice and redistribution. But another way that I'm going to talk to you about today is the idea of equity as overall educational achievement and what that looks like, and a place that's doing it well. In the end, this is a battle of resources. This is a situation where some are going to get more. Though those of you in education are the ones that fight for that idea. It also means that we're going to have to challenge people to see the world a little bit different. That's me every day, that's you every day, that's your students every day. Probably the hardest part of this is your parents every single day. Last, we've got to think, this challenge is this idea of what we mean by all. Sometimes when we treat everybody the same, it means we treat everybody equal, and we get nothing done at the end of the day, right? One of the things that we've got to get away from is this idea that when we look at things being different and allowing things to be different, that is what education is about. We've been fighting for that one for a long, long time. We've been fighting for that one for a long, long time, but the idea here is we've got to at least recognize that we've got to treat different students differently. And that's, I know it's easier said than done. It's easier said than done in good districts that fight for this, but that's not the case everywhere. And so who's doing this well? And what's a good place to look at for this idea of equity being both a path to excellence? How many of you know what's going on in Finland? Anybody know what's going on in Finland? No? You can look it up on your phone. Finland's an interesting place. In 1999, the 2000 PISA, which is the international assessments, came out. And out of nowhere, Finland was the highest scoring country in the world. And everybody said, what's going on in Finland? What's going on in Finland? And they went to Finland looking for answers, right? And me included, I literally took a trip to Finland to see what was going on out there. By the way, it's amazing. Their teachers get paid as much as doctors. Literally, they get paid the highest paid profession, no standardized tests. The curriculum is all classroom-based. It's a very different approach to education. But when I talked to them, they said, we did not set out to become the most excellent country in the world. We set out to become the most equitable country in the world. That was our goal, right? And so what they did here was they said, look, our goal in this last part that is, I still remember, this is from a book called Finnish Lessons by a scholar who wrote a lot about Finland and I had a chance to work with. He said, in this sense, equity in schooling ensures that differences in educational outcomes are not the results of differences in wealth, power, or possessions. A couple things out here. Number one, it recognizes there are going to be differences. There's going to be differences. We've got to recognize that. But second, these differences are not going to be based off of things that are outside of students' control, like how much access they have to power or money or wealth. We're going to focus and work on that. So if you look at what Finland has done, their highest achieving students are about the middle of the pack to other high achieving students in other countries. You take their bottom quartile students, and they outperform the rest of the world by about twofold. Right? It's the bottom quartile students that are pushing Finland along. And they recognize that some students are going to lead differently, but they don't want those things to be based off of homes. And so one of the things that Finland is excited about, and they pick on the United States about, is this relationship between socioeconomic status and student performance. I know this is a political battle. I know people mention it all the time. Yeah, I get it. However, I've spent a long time running a lot of numbers on this, and there is a relationship. Wow, big finding there, Garcia, but there is. In fact, if you could put one thing, just to give you some idea, if I could add, well, actually two things, and try to predict a student's life outcome, do you know what those two things would be? Anybody? Two things about you. Two things about you. Okay, so what do you got? I'll pick on you because you're over there smiling and I know you will. What do you got? Two things. I'm a statistician. I want to predict where you're going to go in life on two things. What two variables would I pick? Socioeconomic status. Parent involvement. Two things. Ready?
Right.
Mother's education level. Mothers. Dads, what does it say about us? Think about this for a second. Mother's education level, which is highly associated with socioeconomic status. And second, mother's expectations. Those two things can predict a student's outcome better than just about anything else. Right? It means dads, whether we like it or not, we're not in the picture enough to count statistically. Okay? But it also means that it's the socioeconomic status that comes with a parent's education level. In other words, does mom have enough money, access, know how the system works? And second, how much drive they have? Those are actually the two highest things. That's amazing when you stop and think about it. And so in Finland, what they're most proud about is that the United States has the strongest relationship between socioeconomic status and outcomes. In other words, we want to predict where you're going to end up in school by where you started. We would have one of the strongest relationships in the country. They don't find that to be a good American dream. right? They pick on us about that. And Finland, you notice, is way down toward the bottom there. Now you're going to tell me a couple things. Garcia, Finland's tiny. Yes, they are. Get it? And you're going to say Finland doesn't have the same racial issues that the United States does, and there's some truth to that, although they do have their own. But I'll tell you one thing about Finland that's interesting. They look a heck of a lot like Arizona, but cold. But cold. And one of the things I did learn there was that they figured this out for themselves, and I bring that back here in Arizona and say, look, if we can figure this out for ourselves, we're halfway there. How many of you know your country's flags? What are the top 4 up there? Finland, Canada, South Korea, and Japan. Right? These are countries that both have high equity and high excellence. In other words, they're doing well and the outcomes are not based off of socioeconomic status. Lower left are countries like, who's down there? Argentina. Brazil. I think that's Uruguay. Is that right, Uruguay? What's on the lower left? Germany's up there. I don't know which one is the lower left. I can't tell. That's not Mexico, right? No, who's that? But if you look at this, you see a lot of Latin American countries and the United States right there in the middle. Right there in the middle. And so, I think the key here is, what I'm trying to get to you is, equity is not just about doing this because it's the right thing to do, it's for social justice, etc. This is a path to better achievement for all students, including your district. As a statistician, I'll tell you there are 2 basic ways to improve. Pull from the top, push from the bottom. It's that straightforward. And Finland has decided they're going to push from the bottom and have had tremendous success. And as a result, they look at education very, very differently. It's not a deficit model. It's all about needs, and it's all about making sure students have what they need when they need it. Very, very different view of life. And so, the things that we battle with, the things that you battle with, is these key questions, right? We look at, when we think about this, where do achievement gaps happen? Where do they happen? Do they happen in schools? I'll tell you one of my favorite questions to ask business folks. I ask them all the time, the same question. So I can get some answers. You know the right answer? From a time a child is born until the time they graduate, what percentage of their life do you think they spend in schools? From the time they're born to the time they graduate. As soon as you go first. ¿Qué piensas? 60%? 75%. I'm an auctioneer. Do I hear 80, 85, 90, 95? How much time? Think about this for a second. 35. How much time do they spend in schools? Any other numbers?
35%.
90%. 35?
Yeah.
Now we're doing a little Price is Right. You got to go lower. 25. Look, 20. Go lower. 10. A little bit higher. 15%. Think about that for a second. What? What do you mean 15%? All right, well, let's add this up. In Arizona and many other places, many students, let's assume that students graduate at 18, okay? Until they're 5, they're in no school environment at all. That is from 0 to 5, no school. Now you throw in the fact that school is start to finish 8 hours, 7 hours, weekends, holidays, and it dwindles down to 15%. Now, why is this such an important question for business folks? Because if the business community believes that students are in your classrooms for 70% of their lives, and they do, they're going to expect a heck of a lot out of you, aren't they? But when I tell them it's 15, we shift that conversation and I say, look at everything you're asking our public schools to get done in 15% of a child's life. It becomes a bit amazing now. It goes from, why aren't they doing it, to, how do they do it? Because that really is what's going on right now. Right? How do they do it? 15%. The trick on this one is sleep. Sleep. People don't bring in sleep. Sleep's really important when you're 7. Really important when you're 47, right? Gives me a lot of sleep. Okay? That's it. And so, where do inequities happen? Folks, they happen in the other 85% of students' lives. That's where they truly happen. The question is, can we close those achievement gaps and those inequities in the 15% of the time that we have students in our schools? That's the question right there. Can we close them? We may not always do it, may not always get it done, but to me, what's most important about public schools is that that is an aspiration that we hold. And that to me, that's what's ultimately most important. How do we get it? How do you do that in 15% of the time? Now, so the idea here is they happen outside of schools, but they manifest themselves in schools. We see them when students show up, and we do things like test scores and find out that that relationship exists. So some of the questions for you, just that I think about, that I think is always important is, how important is that relationship? What role do schools play? What role should schools play? Right? In the end, as I know, as high level as it may sound, your job, our job, is to change students' lives at the end of the day. That's what we do. And I think it's more important, harder, more ambitious than any other profession that I know of. So how does this happen? This slide is a PhD in education, you should understand. There's a lot that goes behind this slide. This is David Garcia looking at a heck of a lot of things, trying to figure out what comes first, what comes second, and how does it work. So, how many of you know what a regression coefficient is? Looking at a lot of those things is what I do. And so here's how this works. Here's how this works. Number one, how do miracles happen in education? First and foremost, stable families. Notice I did not say wealthy families. It's the reason poverty is so detrimental to a student's educational outcomes is because poverty is associated with incredible instabilities that make it difficult for students to finish. That's what that relationship is about. It's not about not having resources. It's the fact that not having resources means you're chasing rent, you're moving, you're doing things that you can't spend time on school, right? Look, the number one thing I can tell you right now, I wish I had some education philosophy. My mom and dad sat me down and told me that changed my life. That would be a total lie if I told you that. But what my mom and dad did, my dad particularly, that changed everything for me, is he got up and went to work every single day, period. That was it. I didn't realize until later in life how important that was. What that meant was we weren't chasing rent like some of our neighbors. What that meant is I always had a place to go back to. What that meant is he was with my mom until the day he died. What that meant was I couldn't worry about being a kid and going to school. And I didn't realize how important that was. I knew it growing up. I saw a lot of instability, but I didn't realize how important it was to my own development until it was a little bit later in life. So stable families. Number two, committed communities. If a child does not have a stable family, they may have a committed community to pick them up when they walk outside the door and help them. This is the coach, the neighbor, the family member who really becomes that stable person in a child's life. Number three, I'm sorry everybody in here, really is teachers. And I'm sorry you're third, although a lot of people think you're first. You're the most important in-school factor, by the way. But out of school, and here's how this works. In communities without stable families and without committed communities, you need amazing teachers to do some good things. Do you know how rare that is? Think about that. Do you know how rare that is? That is so rare, we make movies about it. That's how rare it is. What are those movies all about? An amazing teacher walking into a community that has unstable families, not committed, and doing something amazing. Truth is, a good teacher, even an okay teacher, in a community that's got stable families and a committed community can do some pretty amazing things. But for those of you who are not in those communities, and you should welcome that because that's where you're making the most impact, it does take amazing effort to get there. And we don't always recognize that. We just think this is what teachers are supposed to do. And it's extraordinarily hard to get it done. Last is resilient students. Every once in a while you get that student that didn't have any of this. They didn't have the teachers, didn't have the family, didn't have the community. They go and make it, and guess what? We make movies and write books about those folks too. But it's not necessarily the way we should be looking at public policy, we should be looking at education. And so we go to this equity conversation, what walks in your door, and you have no control over, are students that don't have that stable family, that may not have that community around them, and your job, coming in third, which now becomes number one, is to be that amazing teacher for them. Or staff member, or psychologist, or whatever it is you do to contribute to the education of students, which I also think is extraordinarily important. And so, this is really what it looks like. One of the things that's also stuck with me for a very long time is that schools are foreign places. They are. And I remember reading and putting this in my head a long time ago. That is some interesting studies from linguistics that basically said the more educated you are, the more parents talk like their teachers. I talk a lot like my teachers to my daughters. But my mom didn't talk like a teacher to me. Right? We still remember, I remember as a kid, I could tell you when somebody from outside my house was calling the house. I could tell. My mom would put on, but we give her a hard time to this day about, we called it the nice lady voice. Nice lady voice. Where she would suddenly start speaking properly and using words that she really didn't know how to use. Right? But what she was doing, because that's a foreign place, the school calling was a foreign place to our home, is she was doing what this act of being, quote unquote, in school. And we still, and to be truth be told, when I'm out public speaking, my family says, oh, David's using his nice lady voice. They call it the nice lady voice. Everybody does in my family. But recognizing that now, what it was my mom at the time, basically trying to translate this idea between school and home of doing what she thought that schools were doing. I still remember sitting in parent-teacher conferences and watching my mom trying to interact with the teacher and thinking it was painful because my mom just didn't know what she was talking about, and she was trying. And I was sitting there going, man, it's embarrassing for me. My mom's using words that's not even right. But it is a foreign place, and we've got to recognize that. And so how do you get there? Well, number one, the one that's natural to everybody is just a child within a family. That's natural, right? That one comes in you don't even know that's part of who you are. It's just how you grow up every day. But these others are not. It is between the family and the community where you learn to become a member of the community. All of you that are working with your parents to try to help them understand how to sort of navigate the system and have a voice, what you're teaching them, whether you know it or not, is how to be a member in the community. How to speak up, when to speak up, when to object, how to contribute, to participate. All of those things, as simple as they are, we all had to learn along the way. And it's not always that somebody sits down with a manual and says, here's how you do it. You learn through experience, you learn through watching, you learn through somebody taking the time to say, I'm going to show you how to do this. The one that's important to us here are students. We learn to be students. It's been a long time, maybe. And maybe you remember this, those of you that have students coming in just learning, but we all learn to be a student. Right? We all learn those roles. Those can be positive roles. They can be positive roles that allow you to encourage imagination and free thinking, or they can be roles that are based around sort of discipline and rote learning. Right? But we all learn those ideas of being a student from somebody else. And last, we learn to be citizens. Right? It's the role between schools and communities that teach us to participate in a civic society and understand this idea of our role and what our responsibility is, not just to ourselves in this case, but to everybody else around us. So this idea that we start here, we start as foreign places, and what we do is teach these roles every single day in our schools. And so to create a climate that ensures equity and access for your students, I'm going to give you my simple recipe. And just so you stay awake for this, the final quote involves Chris Rock. Honestly, he gave you the best approach, the best answer to this question I've found so far. And it comes down to three things. Number one, experiences, exposure, and being explicit. I'm asking you to do these three things no matter who you are, no matter what you do, as long as you interact with students. So let me tell you what they are and why they're important. Let's start with experiences. Shared experiences are foundational. The basis of relationships are shared experiences. And you may tell yourself, yeah, but I'm not from Buckeye. I don't have anything in common with students. And what I'm encouraging you to do is go out and share your experience anyway. Because you know why? My guess is many of your students may not know somebody from where you came from. Right? They may not know somebody that grew up like you did. Growing up, I didn't know anybody that went to college. Not a single person other than my teachers. Right? Nobody in my family, nobody I could call. Okay? And it was only through teachers talking to me about school and about education, that became an experience that I start to realize that is part of me, that I can do this. All right, I get that place. It's what I think is absolutely most detrimental about getting rid of a lot of extracurricular activities in public education, is because it's those experiences that connect you to the rest of the world. It's that trip to ASU, where you see a McDonald's and realize, man, I gotta go to college because this is really cool, right? That matters. And for me, the connecting word, particularly for our Latino students, and I'll focus there because that's my area, what I know best, is a word that I think is the most beautiful word in the Spanish language, and that's mijo or mija. How do you know what that means? My son, my daughter. If you don't know this, ask somebody Latino. I guarantee you they're going to tell you a story similar to mine. Share this experience. But what I've always thought is amazing about growing up in a Latino community is that people you do not know walk up to you and call you mijo. I walk up to young people and call them mijo. I go into a grocery store and people say mijo. I have mentors at ASU who, when I'm really in trouble, call me up and say, mijo. I say, oh man, what's wrong with me? I'm 8 again. But think about that connection. What you're telling people is, what you're telling these young folks is, I'm as connected to you as if you were my own son or daughter, right? And so, it's a powerful world because it connects. Now, this is Mr. Chavez. Mr. Chavez is my 4th grade teacher. Mr. Chavez was the only teacher who ever called me mijo. And Mr. Chavez changed my world in lots of ways. He told me, I still remember the exact spot, mijo, you're responsible. And I went home, I looked it up, I told my mom I'm responsible. And I can't tell you how many times I did not get in trouble. I chose not to go with the other guys in my neighborhood because I was convinced I was responsible because Mr. Chavez told me, mijo, you're responsible. Whatever he said after mijo, I just took as gospel. This slide up here is important to me because when I launched for Superintendent of Public Instruction in 2014, we launched it right in front of my 4th grade classroom. This picture is from that day, and Mr. Chavez introduced me because of how important he has been in my life. This is Kyle Mesner. She's a professor at ASU. Guess what? She called me mijo too. She called me mijo too. And she's not Latina, but she has developed this relationship with me and this idea that she cares about me well enough to say, mijo, you got to do this, you got to do that, this is going wrong. And I listen, right? So it's not the idea that it's the culture, it's the connection that's most important. Second is exposure. Get out there and find other people, whether it's yourself professionally, whether it's with other students, whether it's with your parents, if this thing will go. And get exposed to other people. Those of you professionally, I know this year you're going to go to a conference somewhere, correct? Yes? And you're going to get a chance to hear something, hear somebody. I'm asking you to do one thing. Go out there, show somebody what you can do, get exposed to them, listen, and contribute back to what they're doing. Because it is no secret, or if you think about it, minority-headed households or organizations, or even female-headed businesses have more leaders who are female or minority. Why? Because they're just exposed to those folks more. They're around them more. They know that, and this is the key one for me, when there's a talent pool, it's a lot broader than we may think. And the only way we're going to get to that talent pool is if we start looking and getting exposed someplace else. Last one is be explicit. Be very clear about what you're about. This is what I'm about, folks. I'll tell you now. I believe that we're still fighting for inclusion and equity. I want to see our Latino students in our highest achieving schools. I think culture still matters. I still don't understand why we segregate students by language, which, by the way, we've been doing for 100 years in Arizona. 100 years we've been doing this. Nothing new there. And if you want to just get a picture of who I am, there's a little poem called Marked by Carmen Tafoya that, can you read that? That you can take a look at. I found this poem as a freshman in college. I kept it with me. And I told my girlfriend at the time, now wife, that when we have daughters, I had no idea I was going to have daughters, we have 2 of them, I was going to give them this poem as a present. This poem hangs on both of my daughters' walls. One version painted by family, the other version painted by friends. But this poem spoke to me. One of the major reasons is because it had that simple word in it, Mika. That's a great poem. And one that's my motto and my gift to them. And you've got to be explicit about this. You've got to find them and say, this is what I'm about. And so how does Chris Rock fall into all of this? How does Chris Rock fall into all of this? Well, look, I've been looking and reading and thinking, I got to go talk about this. That's what I do as a professor. And I got to find out this idea of equity. And why is it that I need to be honest and say, when students come to my door, I'll help out anybody, but I do have a special place for students that look and that come from places like myself. And is that bias? And I kept looking and reading and I couldn't find anything. And then a number of years back, I remember when the Academy Awards came out and there were no black nominees. Remember when that happened? And someone asked Chris Rock, and he wrote it in an essay. The question to him was, is Hollywood racist? And his response was, damn right it's racist. Right? The first thing he said, damn right it's racist. And he goes down and he starts talking about what it was like and why he specifically goes out of his way to help young black communities. And I realized that is my equity statement. And so they're asking him and he says, look, I'm not Eddie Murphy, but I've done fine. I try to help young black guys coming up because they took chances on me. Here's the key. I do the same for a white guy. But here's the difference. Someone's going to help the white guy. Multiple people will. The people who I've tried to help, I'm not sure anybody else was going to help them. I said, that's it for me. I'd help anybody. But there are certain students that come from certain places that I know have some disadvantages. And if I don't step up and help, if you don't step up and help, then maybe nobody else will. And he goes a little bit further and says, I've just helped Leslie Jones get on Saturday Night Live. How many of you seen Leslie Jones get on Saturday Night Live? She's about as funny as a human being can be. But she didn't go to Second City. Second City is a training ground for comedians out of Chicago. And she didn't do stand-up at the Cellar, which is another famous place. So, how the hell is anybody going to ever get through and tell them that unless somebody like you says to Lauren Michaels, who's head of Saturday Night Live, hey, look at this person? If I don't do that, I called probably 4 managers, the biggest managers in comedy to manage them, and all of them said no. I needed them to get it, and they didn't get it. And they didn't get it until I convinced Lauren Michaels years later. And that's a simple example to me, but it meant that this is somebody who was exposed to Leslie Jones because he was someplace different other than Second City or the Cellar, found talent, and then went out of his way to make a difference for her. And I wish that it was John Dewey or some other great philosopher. Actually, I don't. But it's ultimately about that for me, and it's about that for you as well. This is what the school year is about. This is what I'm getting ready to do. This is what I hope you are getting ready to do as well. And I'm excited that you're getting the year started. You've got some fantastic leadership here. You're going to have some amazing students and families come in your door with their experiences, and I hope you share yours. I wish you the very, very best this year, and look forward to coming back again. Thank you.